Many times we hear people say never to judge a book by its cover. How true is that? Does the cover really say something about a book? Or is the cover entirely different from the content of a book? Well, let us find out as we look into the life of Uju, the beautiful young lady whose life was full of controversies. Uju arrived in Atani, a small town nestled between lush hills and winding rivers. The town was quaint, peaceful, and teeming with old traditions. She had left the bustling city in search of tranquility and a fresh start. The dust from her long journey still clung to her clothes as she gazed at her new home. It wasn't much, a modest house with a small veranda, but it was enough for a woman looking for peace. As she unpacked her belongings, Uju thought of her plan. She had spent years managing a small beer parlor in the city, and now she wanted to replicate that success in Atani. The town lacked such entertainment, and it seemed the perfect business to set up. Uju's beauty was striking. Her smooth dark skin glowed under the sun, and her smile, so beautiful. Her eyes, sharp and full of life, were windows into her ambitious soul. What Uju did not anticipate, however, was the tension her arrival would stir among the women of the town. It didn't take long before word spread that a young beautiful woman had arrived and was opening a beer parlor, a business that would undoubtedly attract the attention of the men. Uju was oblivious to the fact that her presence would soon become a source of concern for these women who were fiercely protective of their husbands. The day finally arrived for Uju to open her beer parlor. It was a small cozy space, adorned with local woven mats, wooden stools, and low tables. The aroma of freshly roasted meat filled the air, and laughter from her first few customers echoed through the room. It wasn't long before word spread that there was a new spot in town, and more men began to trickle in. The men were drawn to more than just the beer. Uju's charm was irresistible. She treated her customers with kindness and respect. The atmosphere in the beer parlor was always light and jovial. Men came not just to drink but to talk, laugh, and bask in Uju's presence. However, Uju was careful never to overstep boundaries. She was professional, polite, and kept her personal life private. Meanwhile, the women of Atani began to grow restless. Their husbands were spending more time at Uju's place, and rumors swirled about her intentions. Every time a man mentioned Uju's name, a wave of jealousy and suspicion washed over the women. They began to meet secretly, whispering about the newcomer who had stolen their husband's attention. At the marketplace, whispers about Uju reached a crescendo. The women of Atani could hardly stand it anymore. Market days, once filled with chatter about children and household chores, had now become sessions of conspiracy against Uju. Chinasa, one of the most vocal women, led the charge. A proud woman with a sharp tongue, Chinasa was known for being protective of her marriage. She was among the first to suggest that Uju was a threat. Every evening, my husband spends more time at her parlor than at home, Chinasa complained to her friend Ezinne one afternoon at the market. If we don't act now, she will take everything from us. The tension in the air was palpable, but Uju remained oblivious to the growing resentment. She spent her days tending to her customers, ensuring that the beer was always cold and conversations always warm. But even Uju began to notice that the women avoided her. When she passed by them on her way to the market, their eyes followed her with a mix of envy and distrust. She shrugged it off, thinking it was only because she was new in town. One evening, as Uju wiped down the counter after a busy day, a man named Obinna walked into the parlor. He was a widower, quiet and reserved, but there was something about his presence that intrigued Uju. Unlike the other men, who who came to laugh and flirt, Obinna sat in the corner with a simple order of palm wine. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was deep and calming. Over time, Uju found herself looking forward to Obinna's visit. He was different. His quiet demeanor was refreshing, and their conversations were meaningful. Uju learned that he had lost his wife 2 years ago and had been struggling to raise his 2 children all alone. There was a sadness in his heart that tugged at her heart, and before long, Uju realized she was falling for him. But Uju knew the dangers of getting involved with a man in Atani. She had seen the way the women looked at her, the way their whispers grew louder whenever she walked by. If word got out that she was falling in love with one of the men, especially someone as respected as Obinna, the situation could escalate quickly. Unknown to Uju, the women of Atani had begun to plot against her. "She must be stopped," Chinasa hissed. "We cannot allow her to continue this. Our husbands are drifting away from us, and soon they will be completely under her spell." The women agreed. They didn't know what they would do just yet, but they were certain that Uju needed to be taught a lesson. As they planned, they never imagined that their biggest champion, Chinasa, would soon be the one to break the unity. One evening, as Uju was walking home from the market, she saw Chinasa sitting by the roadside, crying bitterly. Uju was taken aback. She had always seen Chinasa as a strong and fierce person. To see her so vulnerable was startling. Despite the coldness that Chinasa had always shown her, Uju's heart was softened. She walked over and got close to her. "What is wrong?" Uju asked gently. Chinasa looked up, her eyes swollen with tears. For a moment, she hesitated. This was the woman she had always vowed to destroy, the woman she believed had ruined her marriage. But here she was, offering her comfort. Torn between her anger and gratitude, Chinasa finally opened up. "My marriage is falling apart," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I don't know what to do anymore. My husband barely looks at me. He spends all the time at your parlor." Uju listened carefully, her mind racing. For the first time, she understood the depth of the resentment the women held towards her. It wasn't just about her beauty or business. It was about their fear of losing their husbands. After a long silence, Uju spoke. "It's not me that is causing the distance between you and your husband," she said softly. "Maybe it's time to look deeper into your relationship. Sometimes, we get comfortable and forget to nurture the love that brought us together." Chinasa was taken aback. She had expected Uju to brush her off or gloat, but instead, she was offering her help. Uju took Chinasa to her home, and over the next hour, she gently advised Chinasa on small ways to reignite the spark in her marriage. She spoke of her own experience in relationships, how important it is to keep things fresh, and how communication could heal even the deepest wounds. Chinasa listened intently, and for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Chinasa returned home that evening with Uju's words echoing in her mind. For the first time in months, she didn't feel overwhelmed by frustration. Instead, she was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. As she entered her house, the familiar creaking of the wooden door greeted her, but today, everything felt different. Her husband, Nnamdi, was busy doing his thing, barely acknowledging her presence. Chinasa paused for a moment, observing him. She thought back to when they were first married, the laughter, the late-night conversations, and how they had once been inseparable. It seemed like a distant memory now. Determined to make a change, she set about preparing dinner, but with a twist, she made his favorite dish, bitter leaf soup with pounded yam, something she hadn't done in a long time. As the aroma filled the house, Nnamdi looked up, surprised. "You're making bitter leaf soup?" he asked. his voice a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Chinasa smiled softly. Yes, I thought it might be nice to have something special tonight. For the first time in months, they sat together at the table, sharing a meal that wasn't marked by silence. Chinasa took Uju's advice and tried to engage him in a conversation, asking him about his day, his work, even cracking a few light-hearted jokes. It wasn't long before Nnamdi's stiff demeanor began to melt. He laughed, a sound Chinasa hadn't heard in a while, and the tension that had lingered in their marriage started to dissipate. That night, as they lay in bed, Chinasa reached out to hold Nnamdi's hand. He didn't pull away. It was a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of a rekindled connection. The following days saw a remarkable transformation in Chinasa. She began to take more interest in her appearance, not for anyone else, but for herself and her marriage. She wore the bright, colorful wrappers that Nnamdi used to compliment her on, styled her hair differently, and most importantly, she approached her relationship with a new sense of intentionality. Nnamdi noticed the change almost immediately. He began spending more time at home, offering to help her around the house, and even suggesting that they take walks in the evening, something they hadn't done in years. The spark that had long been extinguished slowly reignited. Chinasa couldn't keep the news to herself. She shared her experience with her closest friend, Ezinne, who had been facing similar struggles in her marriage. Ezinne, intrigued by Chinasa's transformation, decided to visit Uju herself. Ezinne approached Uju's beer parlor one afternoon. She had been hesitant at first. After all, the women had spent weeks plotting against Uju, but Chinasa's glowing testimony had piqued her curiosity. If Uju could help Chinasa, perhaps she could help her too. When she entered the beer parlor, Uju greeted her warmly, as she did with all her customers. But Ezinne wasn't here for drinks. I need to speak with you, Ezinne said, her voice low and cautious. Uju, sensing the seriousness in her tone, led her to a quiet corner of the parlor where they could talk privately. Ezinne explained her situation, how her marriage had grown cold, how her husband Chinedu spent more time with his friends than with her, and how she felt powerless to change it. Uju listened intently, nodding at appropriate moments. When Ezinne finished, Uju smiled softly and said, "The first step is recognizing that things need to change, and you've already done that. Now it's about being intentional with your efforts." Uju spent the next hour sharing with Ezinne the same advice she had given Chinasa, along with a few new tips. She emphasized the importance of small thoughtful gestures, communication, and keeping the romance alive even in the most mundane moments. Ezinne left the parlor that day feeling hopeful. She decided to put Uju's advice into practice immediately. As the days passed, more women began to notice the changes in Chinasa and Ezinne's marriage. The once distant and disinterested husbands were now more engaged, spending time at home and sharing affection they hadn't displayed in years. Word began to spread that Uju wasn't the threat they had once thought her to be. In fact, she was a source of wisdom, helping the women of Atani rediscover their marriages. Slowly, the women's hostility towards Uju began to fade. They saw her not as a rival, but as someone who could help them. One by one, they approached her, each with their own stories of marital struggles. Uju, patient and kind, offered advice, never judging, always encouraging. By now, Uju's reputation has spread beyond the beer parlor. She was no longer the beautiful woman who served drinks to the men of the town. She had become a confidant to the women of Atani, a guide helping them navigate the complexities of love and marriage. While Uju was helping the women of Atani, her bond with Obinna grew stronger. Their quiet conversations became the highlights of her evening, and though they had not officially spoken about their feelings for each other, There was an unspoken understanding between them. Obinna admired Uju's strength, her independence, and the way she navigated the complexities of the town's social dynamics. Uju, on the other hand, was drawn to Obinna's calm presence and his unwavering respect for her. They shared a connection that went beyond mere attraction. It was built on mutual understanding and shared experiences. One evening, as they sat together in the beer parlor after closing hours, Obinna finally spoke what had been on his mind for weeks. "I know we've grown close," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I also know the pressure you're under in this town. I don't want to make things harder for you." Uju looked at him, her heart swelling with affection. "You're not making things harder," she replied softly. "In fact, you're one of the reasons I feel at home here." Obinna smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, and for the first time, Uju felt the possibility of something more between them. Chinasa, having experienced the positive changes in her own marriage, took it upon herself to gather the women of Atani for a meeting. But this time, it wasn't a meeting to plot against Uju. Instead, it was a meeting to discuss how they could all learn from her. "We've all seen the changes," Chinasa began, addressing the group. "Uju is not our enemy. In fact, she is helping us rebuild our marriages. We need to stop seeing her as a threat and start seeing her as a teacher." The women murmured in agreement. Ezinne spoke up next. "She's shown us how to reconnect with our husband, but she also taught me something else, how to value myself. I think we should ask her to teach us even more. We can learn from her, not just about marriage, but about life." It was decided then. The women of Atani would approach Uju not as enemies, but as students eager to learn. They wanted to know more, how to keep their marriages strong, how to maintain their independence, and how to gain financial freedom. They realized that Uju's success wasn't just in her beauty or charm, it was in her wisdom and her resilience. The day after the meeting, Chinasa and a few other women paid Uju a visit. It was a moment filled with apprehension and hope. Chinasa, who had once been the loudest voice against Uju, now stood at her door, unsure of how to begin. When Uju opened the door and saw the group of women standing behind her, her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to expect. Was this another attempt to push her out of the town? Had the animosity returned? But when Chinasa spoke, her words were filled with sincerity. "Uju," she began, her voice calm and measured, "we came to ask for your help. You've shown us that we were wrong about you, and we want to learn from you about how to make our marriages stronger, how to be better women, and how to stand on our own feet." Uju blinked, stunned by the request. It was the last thing she had expected. The tension in the air softened as she smiled and welcomed them inside. The women sat together in her small living room, and what began as a formal request for advice soon turned into an intimate conversation about their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. They talked about the pressure of being wives and mothers, the expectations placed on them by their husbands and the community, and how often they had sacrificed their own happiness for the sake of others. Uju listened carefully, offering words of wisdom where she could, but mostly she listened, realizing that these women needed a space to be heard, to feel seen, and to reclaim their sense of self. As the conversation went on, Uju realized that she had a bigger role to play in the town than she had ever imagined. She had come to Atani to start a small business and build a life for herself. But now it seemed she was being called to something greater, to help these women find their own strength and independence. The following week, Uju called the women of Atani together, this time at her beer parlor after hours. It was a warm evening, and the sky was tinged with shades of orange and pink as the sun set behind the hills. The parlor, usually bustling with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, was now filled with the low hum of anticipation. Uju stood before the women, her mind racing with ideas. She knew that teaching them how to strengthen their marriage was just the beginning. These women needed more than advice. They needed practical skills that would empower them to take control of their lives. "I've been thinking," Uju began, her voice steady but full of excitement. "We've talked about how to keep the spark alive in your marriages, but there's something else I want to share with you. I want to teach you how to gain financial independence, how to start small businesses, and how to support each other in building a better future for yourselves and your families." The women exchanged glances, some nodding eagerly, others unsure of what this would mean for them. "Many of you are already skilled in various crafts: cooking, sewing, weaving, even farming," Uju continued. "What if we could come together and form a cooperative? We could create a marketplace where we sell our products and services, not just to the people of Atani, but to the other towns as well. We could support each other, share resources, and grow stronger as a community." The idea was met with a mix of excitement and hesitation. The women had never considered the possibility of running their own businesses. For many of them, their role had always been confined to the home, serving their husbands and raising their children. But the thought of financial freedom, of being able to contribute to their families in a new way, sparked something inside them. Chinasa was the first to speak. "I've always loved cooking," she said, her voice filled with renewed enthusiasm. "I could start a catering business, maybe even host small events." Ezinne chimed in, "And I can sew. I've been making clothes for my children and a few neighbors, but I never thought I could turn it into something big." Soon, the women were sharing ideas, brainstorming ways to turn their skills into viable businesses. Uju could see the fire in their eyes, the same fire she had once felt when she started her beer parlor. It was the beginning of something new, something that would change the lives of women of Atani forever. With the seed of the corporation planted, Uju began working with the women to bring the plan to life. Every morning, after tending to her beer parlor, Uju would meet with small groups of women, helping them refine their ideas and offering guidance on how to start their businesses. She taught them the basics of managing money, how to price their products, and how to market their services. At first, it was challenging. Many of the women had never dealt with money beyond their household budgets, and the concept of running a business was foreign to them. But Uju was patient, breaking down each step into manageable tasks and encouraging the women to take small, consistent actions. Chinasa, true to her words, began offering catering services for small events around town. Her food quickly gained a reputation for being delicious and affordable. And before long, she was receiving more orders than she could handle on her own. Ezinne's sewing business also flourished, with more women in Atani coming to her for custom-made clothes and alterations. Soon, other women joined the cooperative, bringing their own unique talents. There was Ifoma, who made beautiful beaded jewelries, and Nkechi, who grew the freshest vegetables in her small garden. Each woman found her place within the cooperative, contributing to its growth and success. The marketplace idea that Uju had envisioned became a reality. Every Saturday, the women of Atani would set up stores in the town square, selling their goods to the locals and visitors from neighboring towns. It wasn't long before the marketplace became a hub of activities, with people coming from miles away to buy the handmade crafts, home-cooked meals, and fresh produce. As the cooperative grew, so did Uju's influence in the town. She had not only helped the women of Atani strengthen their marriages, but she had also empowered them to take control of their lives. The town that had once viewed her with suspicion and jealousy now regarded her with admiration and gratitude. The men of Atani too began to notice the changes. Their wives were no longer just housekeepers, they were business owners, contributing to the household income and bringing new energy into their homes. The dynamics in the town began to shift, with men and women working together in ways they hadn't before. But Uju's journey wasn't without its challenges. As her influence grew, so did the pressure on her. There were still some women who remained skeptical of her intentions, and a few men who felt threatened by the changes she had sparked. Uju had navigated these tensions carefully, always mindful of maintaining balance in the community. Through it all, Uju remained focused on her vision. She wasn't just building businesses, she was building a future for the women of Atani. A future where they could stand tall, proud of their accomplishments and secure in their independence. Amid the growth of the cooperative, Uju's relationship with Obinna continued to blossom. They spent more time together, sharing quiet moments away from the bustle of the beer parlor and the town. Uju found solace in Obinna's presence, a steady anchor in the midst of her busy life. Obinna, too, had found healing in his relationship with Uju since the death of his wife. He had been weighed down by grief, struggling to raise his children on his own. But with Uju, he felt alive again, as though a part of him that had been dormant for years was finally awakening. One evening, as they sat together by the river that flowed behind Uju's house, Obinna finally expressed what had been on his mind. "I never thought I'd find love again after losing my wife," he said quietly, gazing out at the water. "But with you, it feels different. It's not just about filling the void. It's about building something new, something real." Uju smiled, her heart full. "I feel the same," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "But I also know that this isn't going to be easy. There is still so much we have to navigate, especially with the changes happening in town." Obinna nodded, understanding the complexities of their situation, but he was committed to Uju, just as she was to him. As the cooperative flourished and Uju's bond with the women strengthened, the town of Atani began preparing for its most significant annual event, the Festival of Atani. The festival was a grand celebration of the town's heritage, culture, and unity. People from neighboring villages and towns would gather to celebrate with dancing, singing, and feasting at the heart of the event. For Uju, the festival was both an opportunity and a challenge. It was her first time experiencing the cultural richness of Atani on such a grand scale, and it was a chance for the women of the cooperative to showcase their talents. But it also brought to the surface the lingering tension between the old ways of the town and the changes that Uju had introduced. The town's elders, led by Chief Okeke, were wary of the shift in the dynamics that Uju had inspired. Though the women's cooperative had brought prosperity to many households, the elders feared that the traditional roles and structures were being threatened. They had always believed that a woman's place was in the home, and the sight of so many women running businesses unsettled them. The festival would be a test, not just of the cooperative's success, but of whether the people of Atani could fully embrace the changes sweeping through the town. In the weeks leading up to the festival, Atani buzzed with excitement. The streets were decorated with colorful banners and palm fronds, and the sound of drums and flutes filled the air as young boys practiced for traditional dances. Women gathered in groups, sewing elaborate costumes and preparing dishes for the feast, while men crafted wooden sculptures and masks to be displayed during the festival. Uju saw the festival as the perfect opportunity to bring the cooperative to the forefront. She gathered the women and shared her idea. "This festival is a chance for us to show everyone what we've built," Uju said as the women sat around her in her beer parlor. "We can set up stores to showcase our products. Chinasa's catering, Ezinne's clothes, Ifeoma's jewelry, and everything else we've worked on. Let's show Atani and everyone who visits that we are a force to be reckoned with. The women were eager but nervous. The festival was a prestigious event, and the town elders had a strong influence on what was considered acceptable. Many of the older women feared they would face backlash for stepping too far out of traditional roles. Chinasa, always the bold one, spoke up. We can't hide forever. We've already seen the changes in our homes and in our lives. It's time we show the rest of the town that we can balance tradition with progress. Her words resonated with the group. Slowly, the women began to plan how they would present their work at the festival. They worked tirelessly, staying up late into the night to perfect their crafts and rehearsing how they would present their goods and services to the visitors. There was a shared sense of anticipation, but also a lingering fear of how the town's leadership would react. Meanwhile, as the women prepared for the festival, the town's elders held their own meetings. Chief Okeke, an imposing figure with a deep voice and a stern demeanor, was concerned about the changes taking place in Atani. We cannot allow the old ways to be swept aside, Chief Okeke said during one of their gatherings. Our women have always upheld the values of this community by caring for their families and preserving our traditions. What is happening now with all these businesses and cooperatives? The very fabric of our traditions are threatened. The other elders murmured in agreement, though some were less concerned. Elder Nwachukwu, the oldest among them, stroked his chin thoughtfully before speaking. Chief Okeke, I understand your concerns, but we cannot ignore the positive impact this change has brought. Our sons and daughters are happier. Our homes are more prosperous. Perhaps there is a way to blend the old with the new without losing who we are. Chief Okeke frowned but did not respond immediately. The truth was, he had seen the changes too. His own wife had started baking and selling bread, bringing in extra income that had helped their family. Yet, the idea of women stepping so far beyond their traditional roles unsettled him deeply. The elders decided that they would attend the festival with a careful eye, watching closely to see how the cooperative and its growing influence fit into the town's traditions. They were determined to protect Atani's heritage, but they couldn't deny that change was in the air. The day of the festival arrived with much fanfare. The sun rose high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets of Atani. People from neighboring towns began to arrive, filling the streets with vibrant colors and the sound of joyous celebration. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled meat, fresh fruits, and sweet palm wine. The women of the cooperative set up their stores in a prominent corner of the marketplace, their goods displayed with pride. Chinasa's catering stand was brimming with delicious local delicacies, jollof rice, spicy suya, and bowls of pepper soup that drew in customers with their rich aroma. Ezinne's store was a riot of colors, with her handmade clothes and head wraps catching the eye of every passerby. Ifeoma's jewelry sparkled in the sunlight, and Nkechi's fresh fruit tables were laid out in neat, inviting rows. Uju moved between the stores, encouraging the women and ensuring everything was running smoothly. She had decided to keep a low profile during the festival, allowing the women to take the spotlight. But even as she moved quietly through the crowd, she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. The cooperative was thriving, and this was their moment of shine. As the festival reached its peak, the town elders made their way to the marketplace. Chief Okeke led the group, his face stern as he observed the stores. Behind him, Elder Nwachukwu walked more slowly, taking in the sights with a thoughtful expression. The elders stopped at Chinasa's catering store first. Chief Okeke watched as customers praised her food, happily paying for the meals she had prepared. Chinasa greeted each person with a smile, her confidence growing with every sale. Next, they moved to Ezinne's store, where a group of women were admiring the dresses she had sewn. The vibrant patterns and intricate stitching were a testament to Ezinne's skill, and her business was clearly thriving. Chief Okeke said nothing, but his frown deepened. Finally, they arrived at Ifeoma's jewelry store, where a small crowd had gathered. The beads and necklaces she had crafted sparkled in the sunlight, and customers eagerly handed over their money to purchase her creations. Chief Okeke turned to Elder Nwachukwu, his expression unreadable. "What do you think of all this?" he asked, his voice low. Elder Nwachukwu smiled gently. "I think this is progress, Okeke. Look at them. Our women are thriving, and they are still part of this community. They haven't abandoned their families or their traditions. They've simply found new ways to contribute." Chief Okeke remained silent for a moment, watching as the women continued to sell their goods. He couldn't deny the truth in Nwachukwu's words. The women hadn't abandoned their responsibilities. They had simply expanded them. The town was still intact, and the festival was as vibrant as ever. But change, as always, came with challenges. Just as the festival seemed to be reaching its high point, a group of men approached Uju's beer parlor, their faces marked with disconnect. Among them was Emeka, one of the town's more traditional men, who had always been vocal about his disapproval of Uju's influence. "Uju," Emeka called out as he stepped into the beer parlor, "you've been stirring things up in this town. First, you take the attention of our men, and now you've turned our women into business owners. What are you trying to do?" Uju remained calm, but her heart raced. She had always known that there were some who would resist the changes she had helped bring about. But this confrontation was more direct than she had anticipated. "I am not trying to take anything from anyone," Uju replied evenly. "I'm only helping the women find ways to improve their lives and families. This is about progress, not competition." Emeka scoffed. "Progress? You've turned our town upside down. The old ways were good enough for our ancestors, and they should be good enough for us." Before Uju could respond, Obinna entered the beer parlor. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Emeka's aggression, and his presence immediately diffused some of the tension. "Emeka, things change," Obinna said, his voice steady. "Our ancestors built this town, but that doesn't mean we have to remain exactly as they were. We can honor our traditions and still move forward. Look at what the women have accomplished. They are helping us, not harming us." Emeka glared at Obinna, but did not respond. The other men shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to side with Emeka's traditionalist view or accept the reality of the changes happening in Atani. As the festival drew to a close, the tension that had been simmering throughout the day finally reached a breaking point. The elders, still observing from a distance, watched as the confrontation in the beer parlor unfolded. Chief Okeke, seeing the escalating situation, made his way towards the parlor, Elder Nwachukwu following closely behind him. "What is going on here?" Chief Okeke's voice boomed as he entered the room. The younger men fell silent, stepping back to allow the chief to speak. Uju stood tall, refusing to back down despite the growing pressure. "Chief, this woman has disrupted our way of life," Emeka said, his voice filled with indignation. "She's changed the way things work in this town, and not for the better." Chief Okeke regarded Uju for a long moment before turning to address the room. "Our traditions are important," he said slowly. But we must also recognize when it is time to adapt. These women have not abandoned their duties or their families. They have found new ways to support them, and in doing so, they have strengthened our community. Emeka opened his mouth to protest, but Chief Okeke raised a hand to silence him. Uju has brought change to Atani. Yes, but not all change is bad. We will find a way to blend the old with the new, to respect our traditions while allowing progress to take roots. With that, Chief Okeke turned and left the parlor, leaving the men to process his words. Uju let out a quiet breath, relieved, but knowing that this was just the beginning. The path forward would not be easy, but the support of the chief and the elders was a significant step. After the tension at the festival, Uju found herself emotionally exhausted. She returned to her home that evening, her mind racing with the day's events. The support from Chief Okeke was a relief, but she knew there would still be resistance from certain quarters. As she sat on her veranda, gazing at the stars, she heard a familiar knock on her door. It was Obinna. "You look like you've had a long day," Obinna said as he stepped inside, offering her a comforting smile. Uju sighed. "You have no idea. Emeka and some others were ready to tear the parlor apart if you and Chief Okeke hadn't intervened." Obinna sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are doing something incredible, Uju. Change is always met with resistance, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Look at the lives you've already touched." Uju smiled softly, leaning into his warmth. She appreciated how Obinna always had a way of calming her, of making her feel seen and understood. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of Atani surrounding them, the chirping of crickets, the distant hum of voices from the village. "I've been thinking," Obinna said after a while, "about us." Uju's heart skipped a beat. They had grown so close over the past few months, but there had always been an unspoken understanding that the complexities of the town and their respective roles made things difficult. Now, it seemed Obinna was ready to bring their feelings into the open. "I care about you, Uju," Obinna continued, his voice sincere. "More than I've ever cared about anyone since my wife passed. But I know this isn't just about us. The town, the people, they are watching. We have to be careful." Uju nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I feel the same, Obinna, but I don't want fear to hold us back. If we are going to be together, we should do it openly with pride." Obinna smiled, pulling her close. "Then let's do it together." That evening, under the quiet glow of the stars, Uju and Obinna made a solemn vow to move forward together, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. Uju looked at him, her heart swelling with love and admiration. Obinna had always been her rock. She smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Uju asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Obinna smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small simple ring. "Uju, will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Uju's eyes as she nodded, her heart full of joy. "Yes, Obinna, I will." The two embraced. The weight of secrecy finally lifted from their relationship. In the following days, Uju and Obinna decided to make their relationship public. They knew the news would spread quickly, so they chose to control the narrative by announcing it at one of the cooperative's weekly meetings. The women had gathered as usual, discussing the progress of their businesses and the growing alliance when Uju and Obinna entered the room hand in hand. There was a murmur of surprise as the women noticed their clasped hand, but Uju quickly silenced the room with a warm smile. "I have some news," Uju began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Obinna and I have decided to get married. The room erupted into excited chatter, with the women exchanging glances and whispering to one another. Chinasa, always the bold one, was the first to speak. "Well, it's about time," she said with a laugh. "We've all seen how close you two have been. I'm just glad you're finally making it official." The other women quickly followed suit, offering their congratulations and good wishes. Ezinne stepped forward, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "This calls for a celebration. We need to plan a proper engagement party." The women immediately began making plans, discussing food, decorations, and how they could make the event as special as possible. Uju was touched by their enthusiasm, grateful that they had embraced her relationship with Obinna so warmly. As the excitement died down, Uju took a moment to reflect on how far she had come. She had arrived in Atani as a stranger, unsure of how she would fit into the small town. Now, she was not only leading a movement of empowered women, but also preparing to marry a man she deeply loved. It was more than she had ever imagined, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had built. Uju and Obinna prepared for their wedding. The entire town of Atani buzzed with excitement as preparations were made for the big day. The women of the corporation took it upon themselves to plan every detail, from the decorations to the food. The day of the wedding was a beautiful one, with the sun shining brightly and a gentle breeze sweeping through the village. The ceremony was held in the town hall, a symbol of strength and unity. Uju wore a traditional Igbo wedding dress, adorned with intricate beads and embroidery, while Obinna stood proudly beside her, dressed in a matching outfit. The entire village gathered to celebrate the union of Uju and Obinna. It was more than just a wedding. It was a celebration of everything they had built together. The cooperative, the progress they had made, and the love that had grown between them. As Uju and Obinna exchanged vows, the crowd erupted in cheers, their joy filling the air. Uju looked out at the faces of the women who had stood by her side through every challenge. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and pride. This was more than she had ever dreamed of, and she knew that the future held even greater things for them all. As the night wore on and the festivities continued, Uju reflected on her journey. She had come to Atani as an outsider, but now she was part of something much bigger, a community bound by love, trust, and the shared goal of creating a better future. And as she stood beside Obinna, her heart full, Uju knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities for herself, the women of Atani, and the generations to come. This is the end of the story, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. A big shout out to Olinda Smith. Thank you very much for that wonderful comment. Could you please tell us in the comment section what city you're watching from, and drop a beautiful comment. You may just be the one to win the next shout outs. And again, we wish to appreciate all our subscribers. You people are so encouraging. I appreciate you all, and I appeal to you, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, to please subscribe, as this is a way of supporting what we do and definitely does not cost you anything. We appreciate you. Until the next video, keep prospering in all you do, and know that we love you from Zizy's African Tales. Take care of yourself. Bye.